Good afternoon. We're here at Exodus Institute on Chicago's west side. We're located at 816 North Laramie, where we have Exodus Drum and Bugle Corps and several other music programs with the youth in the community, and we also work with some of the seniors. We have job programs and job training. Today, we want to have one of the programs that has been brought in. We have a special guest here. His name is Gavapati. He's here from New York, and he's going to teach us some things about meditation and some things about the consciousness and where the world is headed and how we can actually help. So if you can, please help me to welcome Mr. Gavapati here at Exodus.
Thank you. Thank you. I'd like to thank everyone for having me here today, members of the Sri Chinmoy Center here in Chicago, for inviting me to come and give the talk. We're actually going to start with a brief meditation. I think it's very good as a prelude, actually, for the talk that I'm going to give. And it's going to be very simple, very brief. We're going to do a little bit of breathing exercises, and then go into a meditation with concentration exercises and that sort of thing. I'm going to encourage people a lot to try and form a habit of meditating themselves at home on a regular basis. We often recommend twice a day, in the morning and in the evening. Before you get up, after you get up, wash up a bit, wake yourself up, and then at least 15 minutes to half an hour in the morning, but at least 15 minutes of meditation. You can also do some chanting during that time, things that kind of help you in your meditative approach. And again, in the evening, before you go to bed, it's good to meditate again. They kind of complement each other. Kind of the consciousness you go to bed with is often the consciousness you wake up with. So it's good to meditate both morning and the evening. So we're going to do a little meditation here. We have a shrine that we've set up. On a shrine that you might set up at home, you'll want to put the things that inspire you. So a candle, an incense, if you're of one religion or another, maybe symbolisms from that religion, and anything. It could be pictures of nature, whatever inspires you in your altar. And if you sit and meditate at the same place at the same time every day, you'll find you build up kind of a vibration. And you'll find that if you do this on a regular basis every day, they say we're creatures of habit, eventually it'll come to the point where you just sit at that hour, at that time, and your meditation will automatically begin. It may start out with a lot of effort, but over time it becomes more effortless. So for our shrine, we have some flowers, candle. These are some pictures of my teacher. We call this one the Transcendental. It really kind of represents him in a particular state of consciousness. And it's something that we aspire to be able to achieve in our own meditations. So you set up some place which you can go to on a regular basis, every day, twice a day. And I think you'll find, if you make a promise with yourself to do that for even 3 months straight, you're definitely going to get a major change or transition in your life. So it's going to be very, very helpful to you. You have to see it as being something important. Every day we eat. We have at least one meal a day, if not 2 or 3. And when you meditate, you're feeding the inner aspect of yourself. You're feeding your soul, your inner being. So you have to find that or feel that that's as important as feeding your physical self. So I'm going to encourage you to feed yourself, your inner self, as well as your outer self every day. So I'm going to grab a chair and we're going to begin a meditation. So now when you meditate, it's good to find a comfortable position. You don't have to bend your legs up and so forth. As long as you're comfortable and your back is straight. There's a kind of energy that flows in the back, in the spine, which if you meditate on a regular basis, you may begin to feel that. So you don't want to be hunched over. You want to keep that channel straight. In addition, it's useful to have your eyes, when you're meditating, kind of half open, half closed in the beginning. Half open because you don't really want to go to sleep. A lot of people, they'll start out with their eyes closed and they'll go directly into a sleep kind of state. You don't want to go there. You really want to be very awake. But half closed half open, because if you're concentrating on something like a candle flame, you want things in the periphery to be a bit blurred, but things in the central vision to be very sharp. So having it half open, half closed helps in that regard. So we're going to start with doing some regular breathing, deep breathing, Dirga Swasam. It's in 3 parts. There's inhalation, retention, and exhalation of the breath. There's a rhythm to it, 1, 4, 2. So if you inhale for the count of 1, you hold for the count of 4, and you exhale for the count of 2. The inhalation itself has 3 parts, because you're breathing into the lower part of the lungs, then the the middle part, and then the upper part. So you can try that. Sometimes it helps to put your hand on your stomach and kind of push out, which lowers the diaphragm. And you inhale, lower, middle, upper. And when you reverse, it's from the upper, middle, and then you contract those stomach muscles to push out from the bottom. So I encourage people to try that at least 3 times naturally right now. No retention, but just inhale deeply and slowly let it out. And you always go at your own pace. In yoga exercises, you never strain yourself. And when you're done, just take some normal, natural breaths. So now we're going to do this again, and we're going to add the retention. So the rhythm again is 1, 4, 2. If you inhale for the count of 1, hold for the count of 4, exhale for the count of 2. So again, at your own pace, begin. I add kind of a headlock. When I inhale, I drop my chin into my chest. And you'll know you're doing it, holding it too long if you feel strain. Never feel strain in your exercise. So inhale, hold for the count of 4, and then exhale for the count of 2. And you can use a mantra when you're doing this. Mantras are sort of sacred sounds. A very common one, which is considered the mother of all mantras, is Om. So you might inhale for 1 Om, 4 Ohms for the retention, 2 Ohms for the release. Whatever works for you. You can experiment and see what works best. The next thing we're going to do is a concentration exercise. And to do that, we're going to look at the center of the flame, and we're going to look at the brightest part of that flame. And as we inhale, you want to feel that you're inhaling the qualities of that flame. It has intensity, it has light, it has one-pointedness, focus. And by the way, at home, when you do these exercises like the breathing, you decide how many deep breaths you're going to do, 3, 5, 7. I'm moving things along a little right now because we have some time constraints, but at home, take your time and try and feel what you're doing. But right now, we're going to concentrate on that flame. You're going to gaze out from under your eyelids. And try and feel in the very center of your chest, there's also a flame. And that flame has the same qualities. It has light. It has focus, one-pointedness. It has intensity. And you can feel that intensity as a kind of yearning or inner cry. We yearn for something higher, deeper, more fulfilling. You can close your eyes, at least for the moment, and try and see and feel that flame inside you, in the very center of your chest, your spiritual heart. Try and feel the qualities, that light, that focus. If your mind wanders, bring it back to that feeling inside your heart, that flame, that intensity which is like a yearning or a cry for something more fulfilling within. Now I want you to open your eyes and I want you to gaze at the flowers. You can look at all of them and gradually try and find one that is most inspiring to you. That was a very brief meditation. Quite often will go a lot longer, but as I said, due to some time constraints, we're making things a little briefer today. But this is something you'll want to do at home. And it's like anything, exercise that you do, running, jogging, push-ups, sit-ups, the more you do it, the better you get. And one of the very nice things about, I think, yoga in general is it's not just a system of beliefs, believe this, believe that, believe the other. It's a system of practices. You do this, do that, do the other. And if you practice it, you'll get tremendous benefits from it. So I'd like to move on at this point to a talk that I've prepared for today. And before I actually go into the talk, I'd like to kind of give a context for it, a little background. Back in the early 60s, I often say I came of age in the late 60s. It's around then that I became aware of the movements that were going on at those times that were shaping things, at least here in America. You know, you had the Vietnam War going on, you had the Civil Rights Movement, you had the hippies doing their things, and yippies and flower children. But back in those days, I was much more, you could say, radical in many respects. I liked Martin Luther King, I admired him, but he seemed a bit wimpy to me. I was more into Black Panthers. So I wore, you know, the black leather jacket, the bullet, the power fist. I hung out with those kind of folks, and free Huey, free Angela. That was my mindset, because I felt, you know, if someone does something bad to you, you do it back to them, you know, tit for tat. But I was also in school at the time. I was a good student. I went to a nice high school and had average, you know, high average. And, you know, I always say that the 60s ended in the early 70s. So I graduated from high school and I went on to college. And the movement somewhere in the early 70s seemed to peter down in a sense, or get lost. And meanwhile, here I'm at school and I'm finding there are changes that are happening in me as well. I'm sitting to study and I'm falling asleep. So I figure, okay, I must be sleepy. I go to bed and I'm wide awake. And I'm thinking, what's going on? I've always been a good student. I'd gotten into Harvard University, and my mother had been so proud of me, and now my grades are starting to get affected because I wasn't really applying myself. And I'm trying to figure out what's going on. I'm desperate for a solution. I had a roommate that was into Kundalini Yoga, and he told me about meditation, and I thought, oh, that sounds interesting. That's you getting inside yourself. You see, I'd grown up in a family. My stepfather was a professor of psychology. My mother was a psychiatric social worker. I'd been around all that kind of jargon all my life. I wasn't buying it all. I felt that, you know, there had to be a better approach than having someone else trying to figure you out. And meditation sounded like the thing to do. So I started getting into meditation and all that. But things were going slowly. It's not like instant coffee. I think these days we're so used to getting everything instantly. We want instant results. It takes a little time in meditation. So I was still struggling along. I was discovering things. I was reading widely in the spiritual literature, Eastern literature, as well as traditional Christian type works. And then one day I'm having this conversation with my mother. And she's very concerned because, her son, the Harvard man, looks like he's on his way to bouncing out of college. But I'm trying to reassure her. I'm saying, Ma, don't worry. I'm going to get it together somehow. I'm going to pull it together. I'm going to hang in there no matter what. And at the end of the conversation, I hang up the phone. And then there's this feeling, this opening in the top of my head, what you call the Crown Chakra, and there's this descent. It's almost like crystalline waters that just descend through my entire body, from the top of my head to the sole of my feet. And all the anxiety, all the worries, all the stresses and strains are just washed out. And it's like this complete silence inside me. And along with that silence, there's a sense of knowing, an absolute sense of knowing that I have to leave, that I have inner work to do, and I can't do it right now in this environment. I have no idea what's going to happen, if I'm ever going to come back, but I know at this moment I have to leave and do that inner work. So within a day or two, I pack up and I'm gone. I've left Harvard. And what I want to share with you today is the kind of adventure that I embarked upon, the kinds of things that I discovered along the way, which I call adventures in consciousness. So I'd like to begin really by asking a basic question, one of those fundamental questions I think that we all have at some point in our lives. And that's the question of, what am I here for? What is my purpose? What is my meaning in life? And then there's another question that's kind of related to it, strongly related to it, and that's the question of, who am I? Who am I really? You look in the mirror, you see something, a reflection, but who is that? Who am I really? And these two are inextricably linked, right? It's hard to know what your meaning and purpose is without knowing who you are. Who am I? So how do you answer that question? How do you figure out the solution? It's not like we're born with a book of instructions that says, here's your life, here's who you are, and here's what you need to do, and here's how to live it. We're not given those instructions. We have to kind of figure it out. They say life is an instrument you learn how to play while performing. But life isn't cruel. We do have teachers. And our first teachers in life are generally our parents. They teach us right from wrong, the things to do and not to do. And we start to grow up and we go out into the world. We go to school. We have formal teachers. And we have life experiences as we interact with people. We learn a little more about life and who we are. But again, it's sort of like trial and error. It's like bouncing off of walls, falling, skinning your knees, getting back up, trying again. And that is one way to learn about life. Just plunge into it and figure it out as you go. But I like to think that there's a more direct way to learn about these issues of what my purpose is and who I am and all those fundamental questions of life. And I think to understand that more direct way, it's helpful to take some help from yet another teacher, and that teacher being nature. Because I think nature speaks volumes, but we have to have the ears and the understanding to hear what nature has to say. So let me ask you, when you look at this picture, I hope it's clear enough. I'd like to ask you, not just what do you see, but what do you feel? There's the beautiful flowers almost like they were arranged in a certain way. There's a mist, the morning air, you can almost inhale it. There's beauty there, there's purity, there's something pristine about it in nature. And I think it speaks to us because there's some of that also within us. To feel that beauty, there has to be some of that beauty within us. That purity, there has to be that purity within us. So it speaks to us of these qualities. When we look at a mountaintop, I think we tend to feel a sense of elevation, of being above it all and beyond it all, of transcendence, of going beyond. It speaks to us of that idea of transcendence. Or we look at the stars at night. When I was a kid, I used to like, when I was at a camp or something, to go out into a field and sit, or actually lie on my back in the field. You know, it's a big field, so you couldn't see anything. There wouldn't be even trees in your peripheral vision. You're on your back and you're just staring up into the night sky, and you feel like you're in space. You know, it's like Earth is your spaceship and you're just in the infinite and beyond. I think there's something about that view of the night sky that calls to us something eternal and infinite that we want to kind of leap out into. It speaks of that infinity and eternity. You know, we've spent billions and billions of dollars sending satellites all through the solar system. We've Mars and Mercury and Saturn and Venus and really there's a lot that we can tell just using telescopes and scientific equipment, you know, spectroscopy and so on. We can deduce a lot about these planets without even going there. But, you know, we felt this need. We're even talking about a mission to Mars these days. What is it about nature that challenges us in this manner, that makes us want to go beyond ourselves? You know, I look at this photo of people going down the rapids, you know. Yes, they have vests on, and if they fall overboard, hopefully they stay afloat. But look at all these rocks. I mean, if they hit their head, those vests aren't going to help them. They're really taking their own lives into their hands. This is a great adventure they're having, but it's a dangerous adventure. But somehow they feel that it's worth it. Why do people do this? Why is it that nature seems to call us on this great adventure? This guy climbing a vertical cliff, when he gets to the top, what is his experience? Okay, he's tired, he's sweaty, maybe the hands are chaffed and bleeding. But there's something happening internally in his own psyche. There's a sense maybe of accomplishment, of having done something perhaps that he never thought that he could do, of having transcended himself in some way, of gone beyond limitations. So the adventure is not just an adventure of the physical body, those people going down the rapids or this guy climbing this vertical cliff. It's an adventure in his psyche, an adventure in his consciousness. And I think nature calls us to this adventure in consciousness. And in order to understand that adventure, we have to understand consciousness. What is consciousness? What do we mean when we say, I'm conscious? I think we all have an intuitive notion of conscious, right? We know the shades and textures of consciousness. We know what it is to be in the sad consciousness, okay? When things don't go well, you flunk the exam, you get fired from the job, or you know, the tragedies of life, someone you love that passes away. We know what it is to be in the sad texture of consciousness. We also know the glad consciousness, when everything is going well. You know, when you ace that exam, or you get that job, or your relationships are going well. We know what it is to be happy. That's a state of consciousness. We also know the hateful or hurtful consciousness. And here I sometimes like to differentiate between feeling and emotion. Because emoting is sort of like a one-way arrow, a one-way street. You're kind of pushing what's in you onto the world around you. You aren't necessarily caring about what's coming back. I think this guy on top is emoting. He doesn't really care about the kid that much underneath. But feeling is like a two-way street. You know, it's sharing. Things go out and things come back. So we know this, the hateful and hurtful consciousness, but we also, of course, know the loving consciousness. And I like here to sometimes differentiate between the mind and the heart. You know how the mind is constantly on the move. It doesn't hold things for very long. If you stop the average person on the street and ask them what have they've been thinking for the past 5 or 10 minutes, they probably have trouble telling you because their mind is in this constant stream. But with the heart tends to hold things. You know, if you love someone, you love them for a lifetime. So it has a sense of constancy. So we know these different shades and textures of consciousness. We all have this intuitive understanding of it. But maybe we can get a deeper understanding if we look at formal approaches to consciousness. Maybe Eastern and Western concepts of consciousness, for example. And if we look at Western concepts of consciousness, we come to the idea of the Freudian person, man, woman, or child, as it may be. And the Freudian way is we kind of look at the human being and we break it down. There's kind of an analysis and a synthesis process. We look at the planes and parts of being. In the Freudian way, we look at the lower self, which is called the id, you as you know yourself, the ego, and the superego, which is basically all of the best qualities and moral values that are within you. So id, ego, superego, there's a subconscious that we associate quite often with that id. There's a conscious mind, which is the normal state for the ego. In the Freudian thing, this isn't necessarily a superconscious, although there are contemporaries of his that talk about collective unconscious, which seems to have both super and subconscious elements in it. But basically, you have these different planes and parts of being and different levels of consciousness. And in the Freudian perspective, you're trying to create, so they ask the question, what is the normal person? So if a person comes to a psychologist, what they want to create is the norm. So you don't have extremes. If you are psychotic, that's an extreme. If you bite your fingernails and drum the table with your fingers, that's still norm. The normal neurotic is what they kind of aim for. The average person. So their ideal is the average, the norm. So in the synthesis part of things, you're trying to create the average or the norm. Well, in Eastern thought, they do a similar kind of breakdown. They have their equivalent of id and ego and superego, higher self. They have a subconscious, conscious. They also posit a superconscious that goes along with the super ego or super self. So they do a similar kind of analysis, but in doing the synthesis part of it, they ask a different question. Not what is the norm or the average. They ask, what is the ideal? What is the perfect human being? Because that's what you want to reconstruct. That's what you want to create, the perfect being. Now that's a very difficult question to answer because who here knows a perfect human being? It's not like you run into them every day, so it's really hard to understand how to answer that question. How do you synthesize a perfect individual? But again, I think we can get insights to what that is about by looking at the same teacher that I looked at earlier, which is nature. Because if you look into nature and you ask yourself, what in nature has the least amount of consciousness, or virtually no consciousness? What would you say? Anyone want to hazard a guess? A rock, right? Now, a yogi might look at that and say, well, there's an infinitesimal amount of consciousness in there, but I'm an engineer by training. Infinitesimal is basically zero for me, right? So it's a rock. In the 60s, pet rocks were a thing, and people used to, collect them, and some people talk to them. If you hear talking back, there's probably other issues that are going on with you, but But it was a thing back then. But all it has is existence, mineral existence. But we know that there's this thing called evolution. So we can take a step on the evolutionary ladder. And if we take a step on that ladder, right up from the mineral kingdom, we have, anyone? If you're paying attention in elementary school, you'll remember that they talked about the plant kingdom, right? So the plant kingdom has a physical existence like a rock, but it's far more intricate. It has a principle that has emerged, though, which is that of life. It is a living thing. And in addition, most people would associate a higher degree of consciousness with the plant than they would with a rock. And people do talk to their plants, and actually it's probably a good thing because the carbon dioxide feeds them in many respects. So as long as they're not talking back to you, you're still good. But this isn't the end. You can take another step on the evolutionary ladder. And if you do that, you go to the next kingdom, which is the animal kingdom. Now in the animal kingdom, you see it has a physical existence like the rock and the plant. It has the life force like the plant. But a new principle also emerges. That is the animate qualities, the passions, the rage, and so on, that you have in the animal kingdom that you don't see so much in the plant kingdom. And most people would associate a higher consciousness with animals than they would associate with plants and a rock. But it's also important to observe that quite often what is about to emerge in the next level is already there, latent, in the previous level. So, for example, you have Venus flytraps. They can, eat flies, and they have some ability to move. When I was a child, I remember spending some time in Sierra Leone, west coast of Africa, and there were these plants. I think the common name for them is touch-me-nots. You touch them, and all the leaves kind of shrivel. And if you go back and leave them alone for a while, they blossom again. So they look like they're dead when you touch them, and then they come back to life if you leave them alone. So you see these motor kind of qualities even in the plant kingdom, but they don't really come into their own until they come into the animal, until you enter the animal kingdom. But again, this is not the end of evolution. We can take one more step, and of course, if we take that step, we come to the human kingdom. And in the human kingdom, we see physical, just like the rock, the plant, the animal, but still with some degrees of additional sophistication. We like to make a lot ado about our opposable thumbs that have helped us to manipulate our environments. We have the life principle, obviously. We have the vital capacity, though we're capable of maybe a few more additional nuances than you would normally see in the animal kingdom. But then a new principle emerges. A principle that was latent in the animal kingdom is there, but it really comes into its own in the human kingdom. And that principle is that of the mind, the human mind. And there's a tendency among some to say, with the advent of the human mind, that maybe evolution has come to an end. Because, the general theory of evolution is based on Darwinian theory of survival of the fittest. And as human beings, we don't let those who are not necessarily fit pass on. We use various technologies to augment, to help, to assist. If you're born without an arm or a leg, we don't cast you aside. Even if you have mental handicaps, there are various tools and techniques and programs that we put together. You can get married, you can have children, you can propagate those genes. And so if we allow that to propagate, then maybe survival of the fittest is no longer a principle operating in the world, and maybe evolution ends with us. But does it? Is there something perhaps that is latent in the human psyche that has yet to fully emerge. And I would like to argue that there is. There are other parts of being besides our ego. We talk about the superego. But in some theories of the human psyche, Eastern thought, there's something that you come across called the psychic being. Now, I couldn't get a picture of the psychic being. So what I got is this picture of a child. Because it has many of the qualities that we associate with the psychic being. It has beauty, purity, spontaneity, a certain openness, trustingness, has all these sort of divine qualities. And it's part of our nature. And you can see this in some people. They have more of that openness and spontaneity and sort of heart-type qualities. So this is part which actually exists in humankind and does manifest itself, but it's yet to really fully emerge as a major dominant principle in the human existence. But there are things beyond this as well. There are parts of being beyond this. There's something called the soul, or Atman. And again, I can't really take a picture of it. So this is kind of symbolic. Maybe the bird down here is the individual soul, or maybe the reflection is the individual, and the sun up here is the super soul, the sum of all souls. You have to use your imagination with this one. But there's this fundamental aspect of our being. It is really who we are. You know, if you read the Christian Bible, it talks about God breathing into man, and man becomes a living being or living soul. That breath of God within us is the real in us. That's our Atman, that's our spirit, that's our soul. So you have these additional planes and parts of being. And the real issue is, how do we grow into them? How do we evolve into them? So there's a very interesting thing to consider here. You know, a dog is perfect as a dog, a cat as a cat. But we as human beings, we're never satisfied with who we are and what we are. We always want to be more, we always want to achieve more, we always want to grow into more. The unique thing about the human condition is that we are responsible for our own evolution. Prior to the advent of sentient life forms such as ourselves on this planet, it was more of a blind process, survival of the fittest. But at this point in the evolution of the planet, it's really, as human beings, self-evolving, that we are responsible for our own evolution. That's a very powerful concept and has tremendous implications. So then the question is, okay, how do we self-evolve? How do we bring to the fore these other aspects of our being and manifest them in the world around us? Well, a long, long time ago, in a place far, far away, there was a guy by the name of Pantajali. And he looked at various inner disciplines, systems of inner discipline that were around at that time, and he wrote down what was common to them. Now, these systems of inner discipline were called yoga in general, and there are many branches to yoga. Yoga itself often is translated as yoked or linked to the highest within you. So it's disciplines that allow you to self-identify with higher parts of being, because that evolution is really a process of identification. If you identify a lot with the physical body, then maybe you can end up being lethargic. If you identify a lot with the mind, you can end up being intellectual. If you identify a lot with the heart, you end up being more loving and kind, and so on. So as you identify with higher aspects of being, you grow into and become. So yoga consists of those systems whereby you do that. I can speak of three major branches. There are many, many branches, but three major branches being Jana Yoga, Karma Yoga, and Bhakti Yoga. Jana Yoga is the path of the mind, the path of discrimination. There's a term that you hear, neti neti, not this, not that. In Jana Yoga, you're trying to discriminate between what is real and what is not real. You don't want to get caught up in all the brouhaha of life, all the shifting surface appearances of things. You want to focus on something eternal behind all those shifting appearances. And as you concentrate on something deeper in life, something more constant, steady, eternal, you kind of grow into that. In the process of growing into that, you transcend all your limitations. You go into something deeper within you. So Jana Yoga is considered the path of the mind. Karma Yoga is the path of action. It's dispassion in action. So a karma yogi is not concerned with success and failure. They're more concerned with progress. So they're not exalted by success. They're not depressed by failure. They're always looking for something, again, above and beyond it all. Some deeper theme or feeling or reality that they're growing into. And by concentrating on progress rather than success and failure, again, they go beyond their limitations. The third way is that of the heart, Bhakti Yoga. And there you hear of love, devotion, and surrender. It's love for the highest, devotion to the highest, and surrender to the highest within you. And by loving, devoting, and surrendering to the highest, again, you grow into and transcend. So you have these different paths that depend somewhat on the individual's nature as to which one you might emphasize. They're not mutually exclusive at all. They all kind of go together, but you may tend to focus more on one than on the other. But Patanjali then, looking at all these different systems of yoga, wrote down what was common to them, and he names about 7 things. He talks about yama and niyama. And these are kind of the codes of life, the things to do and not to do. Sort of like, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not lie, all those kind of things not to do, but also the things to do, right speech, right thought, right action. He talks about asana. Many people come across asana when they do hatha yoga, which has a lot of different moves and positions that keep the body healthy and flexible. So he talks about asanas, which really has to do ultimately with your physical well-being. The body is a temple, and if you're going to try and strive for inner perfection, it helps to have a healthy body in which to do it. So he talks about yama, niyama, asana. He talks about pranayama. Prana is a life force, yama means control of it, and pranayama are breathing exercises. We did some deep breathing earlier. I often teach at least 2 breathing exercises, deep breathing and Bhastrika, bellows breath, which is a very rapid breath, which quickens the life force and purifies it. So he talks about these different breathing exercises, which you'll often come across in yoga, that help you in quieting the mind and preparing you for the meditative state. He talks about pratyahara, which is control of the senses. It's said that all the doors of the senses are turned outward. We see the world, smell it, hear it, feel it, taste it. In pratyahara, you're trying to get the reins on that. The reins in this, I think, represent the mind, and this is your ego self and higher self, which seems to be in horror of what's happening. But in pratyahara, it's like you're taking this raging fire of yourself that's burning in all these different directions, and you're trying to turn it within. You're trying to create a single flame out of many flames. So you're pulling back from all the senses that are pulling you out into the world. And when you're successful in that, you achieve dharana, which is concentration. So concentration is like that focal point, that part of the wheel that's constant while everything else is turning around it. It's kind of a leaping off platform for meditation itself. With concentration, you can accomplish all kinds of things in life. You want to be a doctor, a lawyer, engineer, scientist. Having tremendous concentration helps you considerably in doing that. So in similar manner, for meditation, concentration is kind of a leaping off point for it. So once you have mastered some concentration, then we get into meditation, dhyana. And in meditation, there's a sense of growing or of transcending or of becoming. It's this process of becoming. You can have many different kinds of experiences in your meditation. If you want peace, if you want light, if you want joy, all the different qualities that your heart and soul needs, you can bring into your system when you meditate. And when you perfect meditation, you enter into samadhi. Samadhi is being there. If meditation is going there, samadhi is being there. This is a picture of my own teacher, Sri Chinmoy, in what's known as Nirvikalpa Samadhi. It's a state often associated with realization. This is when you know yourself as that spark of the infinite. If you know yourself as the soul, when you can identify with that, not with the ego self or any other aspect of being, when you know yourself as the soul, that is realization. So this is him in that state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi. And so the whole of evolution then is this process of us identifying and growing into these higher aspects of being and manifesting that in the world around us. And it's not something that's easily done overnight. It's where we have this instant coffee society. It takes time, it takes effort, but it's well worth the journey because of all of the things you discover along the way. So among the things you discover is, of course, a deeper understanding between yourself and the world around you. That is, the ability to communicate across boundaries, whether it's boundaries of gender, of age, of race, because you have that sense of oneness, that we feeling, that allows you to understand what others are going through, both their joys and their pains. You have a greater sense of courage, a deeper courage, not only to die for what you believe in, as these gentlemen did, but to live for what you believe in on a day-to-day basis. And in some ways, that's even more challenging because, every day you're challenged. Every day you have to go out and be the person whom you ideally believe you should be. And that's not always easy to do. We all have dreams, we have aspirations within us, things we want to achieve, things we want to become. Some of what we have within us, we don't even know, we're not even aware of until we enter into the inner disciplines such as meditation. I know when I first entered into meditation, I suddenly found myself being a poet. I hadn't been a poet before, but I'm just writing all this poetry. Where's this stuff coming from? But it was some kind of awakening of some part of my being that I hadn't been in touch with before. So I think we're all like icebergs. We have this tremendous, tremendous potential, but much of it is submerged. Much of it is not part of our conscious awareness. We only see the surface of things, and we judge ourselves according to that surface. And that's sad, that's unfortunate, because if we were able to understand our true potentials, to feel that true potential and to bring it to a fore, we could achieve so much more, become so much more, do so much more in the world around us. I'd like at this moment to introduce you to some friends of mine. On the far left is a gentleman by the name of Ashrita Furman. Ashrita has the Guinness World Record for having the greatest number of Guinness World Records. He's an incredible individual. He's pogo-sticked up Mount Fuji. He's somersaulted for 12 miles. Here he's going on to get a record in the 8-kilometer stilt walk or race. And this guy, when he was young, he was a wimp. He was a wimp. But he says this comes out of his meditation, this dynamic energy. And one of the things that I used to do when I first started meditating, I would go home and I would chant Om for half an hour. And I would get this pure energy, this dynamic energy. I didn't know what to do with it. I would just end up cleaning the house from top to bottom because, I didn't know what to do with that energy. He handled it, I think, better. He made some better decisions. He went out and started breaking Guinness World Records. So he attributes it all to what he gets out of that inner awakening from his meditations. In the middle is Shubhra Beckard. Now, she's retired these days from her ultra-distance running, but for the longest time, she had the female record for the 3,100-mile race. 3,100 miles, it takes about a month and a half to do this. They're running every day. They maybe take 3, maybe as much as 4 hours of sleep a night, but that's about it. And then they're back at it every day for like 6 weeks or more. She also had the American record for the 700-mile, the 1,000-mile, the 1,200-mile. And again, she attributes it to her inner life and meditation. The outer achievements are kind of a metaphor for what's happening internally, on the inside. So an incredible person, incredible human being. And on the far right is my teacher again, Sri Chinmoy, doing the shot put. He's a poet, he's a musician, he's an athlete, he's kind of a Renaissance man. He does a little bit of everything. And I think one of the best things I can say about him is he practiced what he preached. Many years ago, there used to be a race in Central Park in Manhattan, sponsored by Pepsi. It was a Pepsi-Cola bicycle marathon, 24-hour bicycle marathon. I'm not really an ultra-distance kind of guy. I've done a number of marathons, but 26.2 tend to be, where I stopped. Some of these others go much further. But the 24-hour Pepsi-Cola marathon was one of the ones that I did a number of years and I really enjoyed. And it was great seeing Sri Chinmoy out there. We're all suffering and going through this, and he's doing the same thing. What he wanted to do was encourage character in us, encourage this sense of sort of never say die, never give up, never quit. If you want to achieve anything in life, you have to have that kind of perseverance, that tenacity of spirit. And this was a way of cultivating that within us. And it's especially true in your spiritual life as well, in your inner life, and prayer and meditation. You need to have that kind of tenacity. So we're all in the process of developing a deeper kind of awareness and understanding of ourselves. There's a kind of consciousness that begins to emerge. This self-awareness of who we are and what we are. And what applies to us as individuals also applies to the larger population, to the world at large. All of civilization is in the process of evolving. Now, the interesting thing is, as individuals, we can leap ahead. We don't have to go at the same rate as, humanity as a whole. But humanity is evolving. I know there are times when we look at things like what we're going through in the world today and we feel like, oh man, we're regressing, if anything. It's not a straight line and a smooth journey up. There are ups and downs, but the gradual trend, if you look over 10,000, 50,000 years of time, you see that there's progress. There's a saying about humanity, about humankind in general, where they say we're just, a little above the animal and a little below the angels. But in reality, we are transitional beings. And what is true today may not be true tomorrow. Maybe tomorrow we transcend the level of angels. I don't know if that's 100 years, 1,000, 10,000, 20,000, I don't know. But if we are evolving beings, and there is no limit to what we can evolve into, then there's no limit to what we can become, to what we can make of the world around us, of what we make of society as a whole. So I kind of have in my mind this image. And it's an image of a city on a hill. And it's a city full of lights. But the interesting thing is the lights comes from the luminosity of the people that inhabit it. It's the people who make up that light. And you can wonder about the nature of that society in this far future. What are their politics? What are their economics? What are the rules that govern those societies? But that may not even be the right questions, because it may be as far beyond us today as we are beyond the apes. I think it's hard for the apes to even conjecture what human society is like, politics, economics, education, and so forth. So I don't even know what that society would be like. I think, though, the possibilities are truly endless. We started by asking this question, the fundamental questions about, what is my meaning and purpose in life? And who am I? And what I hope I've indicated is that it's a journey that we need to embark upon in order to discover that, an adventure in consciousness. I think one of the greatest tragedies is to come to the end of our lives and not know what we were here for. What was our meaning? What was our purpose? Why? What was it all about? I went through all this, and so what? I think that's a great tragedy. Or to think to yourself, oh, if only I coulda, or shoulda, or woulda, to have those regrets. I don't think any of us want to have that on our final day. And I think the only way to avoid that is to dive deeply into your life in a conscious way, to live your life consciously, to understand who you are and what you're growing into and becoming, and to take responsibility, in essence, for your own evolution. I mentioned that conversation I had with my mother when I was first starting out and trying to convince her that I was going to stay in school, and then had that experience that made me decide I had to leave. But before that, I'd had another interaction with her. And she had written me a letter. And I don't actually recall the contents of the letter that she sent me. What I recall is what she wrote on the outside of the letter. It was almost like an afterthought. She wrote it on the envelope. And she said, I was thinking about the discussion we had earlier about who am I and what's it all about as I fell off to sleep. And while I was sleeping, I felt like somebody was tugging at my big toe, like my father used to do when I was a child. And I woke up in the middle of the night, and there were these thoughts that came to me that came into my mind. And I wrote them down on a piece of paper on the table beside the bed, and I put it there, and I went back to sleep. And when I woke up the next day, I read what I had written. And what I'd written was this: who am I is never answered all at once, but like a beautiful flower is forever unfolding. And then she went on to say how she herself was still unfolding and learning and discovering and growing. It was a very reassuring thought that I received from her, and I thought it very meaningful, and I've kept it with me my entire life. And it's something that I think would be meaningful for others who want to embark on their own inner journey as well, so I share it with you now. So I encourage you to begin that journey if you haven't already. And I'd like to leave you with two words that were very significant to me when I started my own journey. Two very simple words, but very powerful. Begin and persevere. That's it. Thank you very much.